So this is all about recruiting, because that's obviously a basic need for any company who's growing. So David, I guess you want to give a little background about yourself and.
Yeah, sure.
You're good.
We're good? Okay, good. Yeah, so I've been in the New York City tech space for the last 5 years, helping high growth tech companies find software engineers. So to put that into context, helped Tumblr through their acquisition. That's how I met Mackenzie. So that was a good story. And Buddy Media and several other startups. And 5 years ago, co-founded SingleSprout. Essentially, we build high growth tech companies, have a special emphasis on social good companies. And within that, we primarily recruit software engineers, data scientists, product managers, data engineers, and pretty much any technical hire that a tech company needs.
Yeah, one reason why I'm happy to have you here is David's been my personal recruiter twice now in my career, so I can definitely speak to his background and expertise in the New York tech scene.
Cool.
First off, I'd like to ask you, can you paint the picture of kind of the hiring landscape here in New York City and California? And who's got the leverage these days? I mean, is it companies or potential employees? And what is it that startups are looking for?
Yeah. What do you guys think? Do the engineers have the leverage or the companies? Raise your hand if you think it's the engineers, the candidates. Yes, it's 100% the candidates. So on average, our candidates receive 15 job solicitations a week. They consider 3 to 4 offers before making a final decision. And it's super competitive. So just to give you an idea of the numbers, in the Bay Area, you have about 1,600 companies on AngelList looking for full-time software engineers. This is just AngelList. And in New York, about like half of that. And that number is only growing. Schools aren't producing good senior software engineers fast enough. And so 100% the candidates will have the leverage. Yeah.
What are some of the differences between those two different coasts if you're hiring in San Francisco versus New York?
Yeah, so I know we were having this conversation backstage a little bit. It's been historically the Bay Area is the tech hub of the world, but that's been that's been like dismantling a little bit. You have Austin, you have New York, you have Silicon Beach. So we're seeing a lot more companies pop up anywhere geographically. From the engineering standpoint, from the candidate standpoint, we've noticed that candidates in the East Coast tend to be a little bit more brass tacks than the ones on the West Coast. They're quick to ask companies about their revenues, the ROI, potential exit plans. So maybe something to keep in mind. I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I think one thing to add is if you start early on and you build with remote in mind, it opens up way more candidates to choose from. A lot of companies think, I want to hire someone in my own room and that's it, someone I can talk to every day. But as that company grows, they start to look at where can I hire additional talent? And if you're only hiring in New York or only hiring in San Francisco, well, you've eliminated the majority of the country. And there's a lot of good talent just moving out to different parts of the city or different parts of the country. So yeah, being open to remote working is pretty essential.
Yeah. Yep.
So hiring and fundraising occupy kind of a huge amount of time for founders. How much time should a CEO or founder spend on hiring, and how much do they think about that commitment?
Yeah, so it really depends. We're talking about fundraising, spending time fundraising over recruiting. Both are very, they take a lot of time. It'll depend on how much money you have in the bank and your runway. So obviously if that's short, you probably want to be talking to VCs. That said, recruiting is a very hands-on process. You know, our founders, we recommend them to be very hands-on. Even with the outreach messages, they have historically higher response rates than anyone else on the team. In fact, some of our companies, the co-founders will have their LinkedIns open or their emails open and have someone from HR or recruiter send messages on their behalf because they're going to be getting more responses. So that's on the outreach side. On the recruiting side, it's also very key. So meeting the candidate, when they come into their office, spending the time with them. Chances are if the candidate's coming from a bigger company, they won't have the exposure to a VP, so it makes them feel special. All the way to maybe even extending the offer, taking the candidate out to drinks or dinner. The more hands-on, a co-founder is, the better. Obviously, this is not scalable, but when you're at your early stages and the early hires are very important, totally recommend spending a lot of time as a co-founder.
Yeah, you also find that first hire who will start luring in additional talent for you automatically. Like you get the momentum going, and other people want to work with this specific engineer.
Yeah, no, Mackenzie brings up a very good point. Your first hire is extremely important on a cultural and technical level. They're going to attract engineers like them, so that could pave the way your tech team looks a few years down the line.
So David, let's get tactical. I'm just reading it as it's written. So you're a brand new startup. How do you make yourself known to potential hires in the first place?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different channels, and for startups, there's some that are cost effective. You know, you can do meetups, sponsorships, hackathons at your office. You know, these events to attract engineers. Some of our CTOs do like engineering blogs, so they'll speak about how they develop in their own company. I'm sure you can speak around that. One trend that I've been seeing lately is the co-founders or even the employees themselves putting "we're hiring" on LinkedIn. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it seems to be like that's the slogan. All the way down to, and I know Mackenzie can speak about this too, is really getting your, like the network effect, getting encouraging your engineers to get engineers they know. So like one company we hire for called Honest Buildings, they're awesome. They'll give their employee a trip anywhere around the world, and the person who they recruited the same thing to get people through their door. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize when they're doing recruiting is you put a job posting out there, it doesn't tell you a lot about the company, it tells you a paragraph. But when that candidate shows up on site, that's your chance. Not only, you're not just assessing whether or not the candidate is technically qualified, but it's your chance to really sell the company. And I think a lot of people miss out on that. I don't know if you've seen other companies, their approach to it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think one of the biggest mistakes is assuming that the candidate absolutely loves your company. I know it's your baby, speaking to the co-founders. Chances are they're being solicited a lot and they're doing other interviews. So at any opportunity you have to sell your company or have your employees sell the company, you should take it. Because just because they're interested doesn't mean they're going to sign and start.
Yeah, we had a big problem with that at a previous company I worked at. Not going to mention names, but we were losing a lot of candidates. We started looking at the data, and we shifted our hiring practice to where the first 30 minutes you're there, it's Q&A for that candidate to ask all sorts of things about the company and the product. We do a demo, we show the type of technology we're using, and we get that candidate excited to be there. So they pretty much put on their best performance for the rest of the interview. By the time most of these candidates go to companies, they've already done 10, 15 interviews, and they're just trying to find the best package. But really, when that candidate's on site, that's your chance to win them over with why it's exciting to be there, why you want to be a part of that team. So yeah, don't miss out on that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Trying to find out where I am here. So you made a good point of stressing kind of quality over quantity of candidates. But what if I'm kind of in a hurry? How can I afford to wait for that perfect person?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I'm out on pitches and meeting companies, we hire for companies here in New York and SF, LA, about 80 different companies, and over 75% of them, believe it or not, after I ask them when they want this engineer by, they all say yesterday. So I mean, yeah, it's very important. So in terms of personalization, that will yield higher response rates. Obviously, it's kind of like you have to find your balance, because if you spend, for instance, 30 minutes finding the best candidate and writing the best message, you know, they can be very happy at their job, and that's a waste of 30 minutes. So, and you know, the broader you go, the more robotic you seem, and that's less effective. So you really have to understand how much time in a day you have to recruit, really understand what a good profile looks like, and spend like maybe 5 to 7 minutes in writing a very good message, or even better, asking for an introduction if you have a mutual connection. With our company, we always recommend personalization, spending more time for them to know that you actually saw what they do. Yeah.
I mean, interviewing is such a big process. There's so many ways to approach it, and do it right and do it wrong. Are there resources you recommend, or practice, training? Where do you recommend people go to really polish their interview process?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, most people join companies like engineers. They don't know that they're going to be doing a lot of recruiting and a lot of interviewing. So there's definitely a lot of books out there. I can tell you, when this is over, a few books that I recommend. You can talk to me as well. There's a lot of online resources in terms of what a good interview process looks like. We're of the belief that the shorter and the more exciting, the better. Don't assume that a candidate wants to go through 6 rounds of technical screenings and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'll follow up with some information there.
Excellent. And I mean, there's no question that the larger enterprises out there, larger established startups are offering all sorts of wild perks. That makes it really hard as an early stage startup to try to make a compelling offer to somebody. So what are some things that people can offer to a candidate to make the job or the opportunity more exciting and enticing?
Yeah, I think Mackenzie's talking about like the beer on tap, the free
laundry
snacks.
service, the massage service,
Yeah, all that good stuff. So that obviously startups can't really compete on that level. However, there are other stuff that will retain your employee longer. I'm reading an interesting management book called First Break All the Rules, and it speaks about how things like having a good manager, a manager that will develop your employee, having employees feel challenged at their job, and having your employees being in environments that they like the people that they work with will far exceed the dividends and long-term benefit from, compared to a, cold brew or a ping pong table. So these are all things, in addition to, making an impact and having skin in the game, that startups have an advantage over. We sell this every day. We poach people, pull people from the Googles, Facebooks, not Amazon. We don't do Amazon. But, and tell them about, like, hey, you can go to a smaller place and make a bigger impact and, exponentially grow in your career as the company scales.
Yeah, all too often I hear about engineers going to these large companies, and it's great pay, but they find out in day one that they're working on a tiny piece of the entire application. Where in a small company, you get hands-on with everything.
Yeah, exactly.
That's way more fun for an engineer. Can you talk to us about cultural fit? How important is it, and how do you match people and culture?
Yeah, so culture is like one of those things that you don't realize how important it is until you don't have one. You could do, so there's very intense tests you could do, like the Myers-Briggs test, different personality tests. It's not really practical for a startup that's moving quickly. So there's a series of questions, if you study them, like what motivates you and how do you deal with conflict, so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's, especially we're speaking about the first hire, it's extremely important to hire for cultural fit as well as technical fit. We take the time to meet all of our candidates and companies to get an understanding of that. Otherwise, I mean, I'm sure you've seen stories too. You have someone who's unbelievably talented, but is rubbing everyone the wrong way, and all of a sudden you have a recruiting problem because people leave your company.
Yeah, being smart and knowing the right answers is one thing, but interfacing with other people and being polite about how to basically approach those solutions together, that's a whole separate thing.
Yeah, there's this thing, the no asshole policy, which I'm sure you've heard of, and especially at a startup, that's very important.
At the same time, how do you avoid the "I'll hire people just like me" problem? If you just keep hiring the same individuals that just replicate the same personality traits and goals and everything else, how do you avoid that? Because you're basically it's not helping from a diversity perspective.
Yeah, so it's that could be a little bit of a slippery slope. You want to make sure at the beginning it's understandable. You as the co-founder will be involved in the recruiting. Naturally, you're attracting people like yourself. That's the way it works. So the quicker you delegate the recruiting process to an HR individual or a recruiter, that's pretty different than who you are. They'll start attracting people like who they are and so on and so forth with your other employees. So it's important. I'm curious how you did it when you were at your companies, but having multiple people in the interview process to diversify that pool.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I've seen a lot of companies do is they get excited because they'll hire one person and they'll bring their entire team over. But now you have 4 or 5 people and they're known as that clique or that group. And now you're no longer having an engineering conversation or discussion with one person. You now have to fight against 5 people and trying to make your point. And it starts breaking culture down very quickly. That slowly hiring from this and making sure you have diverse, different startups, different universities, whatever it is, as long as the backgrounds are different, at least you get a more diverse opinion on the direction of the company. It's just very easily, you'll start to get these cliques forming within any size company.
Yeah. And a key thing there is finding your talent from different channels. Yeah, that would help solve that for sure.
What kind of channels?
So yeah, I mean, there's several. You have your Angel List, you have your LinkedIn, employee referrals is one we were talking about. If there's also agencies like ours, you can do that as well. Yeah.
When do you think about hiring outside of engineering and technical talent? So who should be that first non-technical hire for your company?
Yeah, so I guess that depends on the company. There's some companies that want to make revenue off of day one, so you should be targeting like a business development or salesperson. There are those companies that are going more for a user base, and maybe that's a product or a marketing person. We've seen the full gamut of the second hire. Yeah, so I guess it really depends on what you're building.
What about your first CTO? At what point should they come in?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of, let's say, technical or non-technical co-founders that are looking for their CTO. They tend to call them CTOs, but they're really full-time software engineers that need to build a product. So, it can vary how you attract this type of person, but the important thing is that you hire someone as a CTO who can help recruit a team, manage it, lead it, and build it out. There's a very big distinction between a CTO that does that and a CTO who's your second hire and is just building applications.
Can you talk about kind of how your recruiting pitch should change as your company grows and evolves? Your pitch when you're one person is going to be way different than when you're 50 or 100. So how does that evolve as your company is growing?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, we hire for many startups, and that they evolve, they grow over time. Like we hired for Blue Apron when they were 10 people, and now they've gone public. So at the beginning, your message should be like, hey, we can offer you high impact leadership. To your point earlier, working on limited legacy code or smaller teams. Chances are, if they're coming from a bigger company, they're bogged down by like the bureaucracy and the red tape. So these are all things that are very exciting as a small company, not to mention like the equity or the stock options. Now, as that evolves, you have a different set of offerings to a candidate. Let's say a more senior candidate, you can offer them the ability to manage more people, and some individuals really like that. Or if it's a junior candidate, you can offer them the ability to be mentored. I think when it comes to recruiting and selling, the key is to understand what motivates an individual. Everyone is motivated by something else. Maybe a person had a shitty manager in their last job. Maybe they weren't getting recognized. Maybe they just want to learn. So you can adapt your pitch. We adapt it all the time, depending on what the candidate wants. So it's to that point, it's very important to learn about who you're recruiting, what they're motivated by. That's one question that we always ask is, what's encouraging you to switch roles? And then go from there.
Do you recommend talking about career advancement and where a candidate might be able to go within the company? Or do you fear that might set up for potential disappointment from the candidate if they don't meet certain expectations?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you don't know, I guess to your point, you don't know if that person's going to be good enough to do that job 3 years down the line. I do recommend to paint a good picture of like where this person could end up if they do a good job. Obviously, nothing is set in stone, and you don't know how the person's going to do. But certainly paint a picture of their future. That's essentially why they want to join your company.
You mentioned it's very important for founders to be involved early on during the hiring process to add that personal touch. At what point should they hand that process off?
Yeah, so again, it will depend on, that's a tricky question. It'll depend on how much time the founder has, whether they're fundraising, managing, doing business development, et cetera. The key is to devise a well thought out recruiting process. So what that means is understanding, hey, this is what I'm doing at the first stage. We recommend do like a 30-minute sales call at the first interaction, like what Mackenzie said. If that goes well, do a technical screen. You know, it can be like a 45-minute to 1 hour collaborative edit, whatever program you use. And if that goes well, 4 to 5 hour on-site, and that's it. If you want to go longer, like have a very good reason to do it. So I spoke a little bit about what the process should look like, but once you get a well-devised plan, make sure other people can execute it on your behalf if you're the co-founder, and they understand what they have to do, and then that's where you can kind of step away.
How do you avoid situations where candidates are just shopping around for the best offer to try to build up their compensation package from other companies?
I think you asked me that last time.
I did. I love that question, and it's so common, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we see it all the time.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can avoid that. You can set deadlines on offers, and that will limit the time they have to shop around. You know, that could backfire. Sometimes it's effective. Sometimes it could backfire. I think the wisest thing is understanding and assuming that they're interviewing at many different places, especially if they're a good engineer, that they're being reached out to a lot, and doing everything you can to sell this person on your company, because you know many other people are trying to sell them on their company. So I don't know if there's an easy answer if you can stop it. Do you have any thoughts?
I will say that the most high pressure situation I was in was after interviewing, the CTO handed down the page and said, here's your offer letter. You either sign it right now, or if you walk out that door, the offer's off the table. Yeah. So I ended up signing it, ended up being a good opportunity, but I don't recommend that high pressure tactic.
Yeah, that's aggressive.
It's risky.
That's aggressive. You know, we see 4 to 5 days. I'll give you an example. If that person is interviewing at a Lyft or a Google, and they take a very long time to get answers, you may want to put a deadline, because then they're forced to make a decision, not knowing if they're going to get another offers. But in the case that they're already interviewing at 3 to 4 places and they're waiting on offers, they're not going to not see the other ones through if they got in that far.
I think a lot of people also think that once that candidate declines an offer, that relationship ends, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
A lot of people will go and they'll start a new job, and it's just not what they expected. They're not working on the team they wanted to, not the product they're working on. They might not like the company overall. And so something to keep in mind is, go and look at these candidates a year later, and maybe they're more interested now. Maybe you have something to offer them that their current employer can't.
Yeah, I mean, same goes for recruiting in the middle of the recruitment process. It doesn't have to be at the end. So if you meet someone and they didn't cut it, or let's say they weren't interested, they didn't make it to the offer stage, those are people that you should have in your pipeline, keeping track of them, touching base with them, because that could happen as well.
What are some other key mistakes to avoid if you're kind of new at the whole recruiting process?
Yeah, so I alluded to this just right now. I think a mistake would be assuming that they absolutely love your company and they're the only company they're considering. We know it's every one of our companies thinks their company is the best, and I'm sure it is in many ways. But the reality is that there's a lot of noise out there. So do everything you can to sell your company to this candidate at every stage of the interview process. So it's okay if you're going to vet them, but you could end the call or the meeting with telling them about how good your company is doing. So that's very important. Another thing that I've seen is these long-winded interviews, interview cycles. So up to 5 stages or 6 stages. Chances are, if this person's good, they're employed. They're probably interviewing at a few other places, and they have their personal life. So they're not going to jump through all the hoops that you would want to. So those are a few. Another one, that kind of kills us every time is lowball offers. When companies, maybe want to offer 5, 10, 15K below what the candidate is asking. At the end of the day, if the person is good, they're going to bring tremendous value to your company. 10K here and there is not that much, and it really rubs people the wrong way. You're working from way below to try to get them, excited again about this.
Another big mistake I see during the interview process is every company has a competitor, and the candidate's going to ask about your competition because they want to know what you think of them. And some people fall into this trap of just spending their time talking negative about the competitor and spending more time talking about the competition than about why their product's good. So keeping on a positive note entirely it's a huge benefit. If I went and all my interviewer did was talk about all the stuff that this other company was doing, I would leave there and go apply there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We train our employees, and I think most people should know, like, not to bash the competition. Use it as an opportunity to explain how good the market is, because there's so many good companies popping up.
So how long does it take after hiring these new people, they're now in the office, before I realize I either did or did not hire the right people for that role?
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, but I think you're a perfect example of that.
For the good or the bad?
For the good.
Okay, just want to make sure.
So you have a good employee when they're meeting your expectations, building the code or whatever it is, the application they said they wanted to build, or exceeding them. That's even better. I think you have a great employee when all of a sudden they become an ambassador to your company, an advocate, both internally and externally. We placed you at one company, and all of a sudden your role shifted in being like the recruiter. So clearly, like, he was a great value add to this company, because not only was he motivating everyone internally to do well and mentoring them and encouraging them to get more employees, but even at events or like tapping into your own network, you were representing the brand, the company in the best way possible. And to me, that's hiring an exceptional employee. Well, you're not only doing your job, but you're spreading the love there.
How do you encourage your employees you've hired to continue doing that? So it's not just one person doing it in an organization. Like, how do you encourage them to tap into their networks and reach out to them? What methods work? What doesn't?
Yeah, so you can incentivize in certain ways. I mentioned, like giving, some companies will give up to like $10,000-$15,000, something like that, to get them to recruit their engineers and such. So you can do things like that. I think so that goes a certain way. The other thing is like, hey, you want to work around. You're here like 10 to 12 hours a day. You want to work with cool people you like. So why not bring your friends in? People it'll make the work environment more enjoyable. That helps a lot. Have you seen something else or?
No, I think at Tumblr we did. You would get, I think, $15,000 to spend on a team outing.
Yeah.
So you'd go to like medieval times. You'd go to like race cars somewhere, and it built like that culture of fun of working with each other.
Yeah.
But then when people started offering a cash option or that, everyone went for the cash option.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I guess it depends on your audience, the size of the company, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, the $15,000 is recruiting on a budget. If you go to an agency, they're going to charge you a lot more, such as ourselves. So if you could get away with $10,000 to $15,000, then that's a pretty good deal. Obviously, the best case, we were hiring a VP of engineer for a company. And on a retainer, and it just so happens that they had posted an angel ad for a CTO, and like 6 months later, they got their best candidate through there, so it was basically free. So there's no, definitely take all the channels you can to, increase the top of the funnel.
I think it's a good opportunity to open up for questions. So immediately there are questions. This is fantastic. I should have prepped someone for a mic. Sorry about that. David, this question's for you.
Your thoughts on equity compensation and the current trends, thinking around it?
On equity?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something you should definitely consider. It depends on the size of the company. It's extremely common. 99% of the companies, there's probably one that we hire for, doesn't give out stock options. But they're a different type of company. But yes, you should definitely offer that in the package, and that's inversely proportional with cash. The more you raise, the larger you are, probably the less you can offer. So that's a good sign. Also, if you have an engineer opt in for more equity, that means that they really believe in your company. We see a lot of founders offer two different packages. So one higher cash, lower equity, vice versa, and hopefully you want them opting into more equity.
Yeah, that option is really. At Oscar, we did 3 different options.
Yeah.
And so it's like equal or high, one low.
Yeah.
But that candidate having that choice, that option, they feel like they have more control over the decision rather than if you make one offer, you're going to be negotiating for it. And you might lose out to somebody else over like pennies. It doesn't make sense. So
Yeah, the options seem to be pretty good. Yeah.
Hey, David, thanks for coming. You shared your insight and advice when it comes to hiring employee 1 going forward. Can you tell us how that changes when you're sitting down with your potential co-founder or a potential co-founder who may tackle that project with you going forward?
So your question is how that changes when you're sitting down with the co-founder?
Correct, yes. Or what things would change.
And what do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. So, well, what I'm asking is, do you follow the same guidelines when you're sitting down with someone who will have like a large equity stake and your next co-founder versus if you were already established and now beginning to hire like employee 1, 2?
Yeah. So if hopefully I understand your question correctly, so yeah, when you're doing your first hire, there's going to be the most interaction with the co-founder. I mean, obviously, as you grow, you know, the co-founder is going to be less involved, and you're going to have other people do it on their behalf, on the co-founder's behalf. I mean, I would recommend, you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts around this, is, you know, at the end of the process, the recruiting process, usually when you're extending an offer or right before that, the co-founder should be involved in explaining what the equity means, really showing their appreciation. You know, many times these candidates come from bigger companies. They don't meet their VPs or what have you, so the more hands-on a co-founder can be, the better. You know, it's not very scalable, but at least at the very beginning, hopefully everyone in this room can relate to that.
there's a weird shift as the companies grow too. When you're really early stage, everyone in the company talks about how it's our company together, how everyone has ownership in it. And there becomes a point, I don't know if it's 50 employees, 100 employees, where suddenly they don't talk about that as much anymore. You don't feel like you have a say in that size company. Having that ownership from all of your employees is more valuable than the larger companies. You'll get better quality work, you get better candidates, you'll get better people working on your idea. So don't lose sight of that as you grow and try to hold on to that as long as you can. When people come to work and they feel like they're contributing to something that they own, it's invaluable at that point.
What are ways that people that are applying for technical roles, or when you're hiring for technical roles, how can you search for soft skills as well? And then what are those soft skills that companies are looking for right now?
Yeah, so you're saying a candidate applying to a company or a company vetting out a candidate? Both. So yeah, there's a list of questions. You know, if we follow up after this, I can show you that you can ask like personality questions, culture questions. You know, some people do better in creative environments. Other individuals like need that structure. There's asking questions about times that they've been in conflicts with their superiors or their peers and how they handled that. To how do they, if they're a manager, how do they motivate their subordinate or what have you. So there's many questions you can ask. I would get a sense of like where they've worked in the past. Have them meet other people on your team if you can. Typically one person, one co-founder has an idea of what a good culture fit is. But the reality is that when you're growing a company, it's not just you. There's the other people that you've hired as well, and have them get a feel for what sort of person you're hiring. It's very important at the beginning.
The one skill I look for in any technical hire, and this is true at every company previously, was getting an engineering candidate to say the following words: I don't know. Like, it is actually extremely difficult to find an engineer who will admit that they may not know a certain technology or a certain philosophical approach to how to build and architect certain systems. And the last person you want working on production-sensitive systems is somebody who's guessing and pretending to get their way through the systems. So our interview technique at a lot of companies was you just keep asking and drilling down to the technical point to where they just didn't know the answer. If they started making it up, it was an instant, we don't want you working here. You can find plenty of stories about new engineers starting at a company and accidentally dropping their master database, or like updating the wrong DNS and knocking the site offline. So just being humble enough to know where your limits are and what you need to learn is probably one of the most valuable skills for any engineering hire.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point.
All together.
Yeah, all together.
Yeah. Any other questions?
most appeal, like easier to recruit for? The 10-person firm, the 50-person firm? Is something more appealing for engineers to go to an established but not too big?
Yeah, that's a good question. For us, and this might be a skewed answer, but we find it very exciting when the company is not too small, where it could be risky or they're not backed or what have you. But it's also not too big where they can't make an impact and they can't grow on the leadership level. So our sweet spot tends to be, let's say, companies between 10 and 60 employees. But I think it's one of Mackenzie's previous questions, there's something to offer at whichever size that you are. So it's a matter of getting to know what the candidate is motivated by, and go from there. If you have a candidate that really wants a lot of mentorship and is risk averse, and wants to work maybe like 9 to 5 and that sort of thing, then you're talking to the wrong person if you're a startup.
I think there's also a lot of people who get frustrated going into these younger environments, and younger meaning like early stage startups, because a lot of that process isn't defined for how that company runs. There's no HR yet. You really feel like everything's kind of chaotic. And so really understanding where to start hiring HR or getting outside HR consultant to start building that for you, vacation policies, just all the basic needs for that office, that'll kind of bring sanity and peace of mind to a lot of engineers. I'm not saying you need a lot of process to make that happen. It's just there's a lot of stress that employees feel in these early stage companies because it's very uncertain for them. And that structure helps them feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah, what I would say is, try to think 3 to 6 months ahead. You don't want to be at the point where you're like, oh shit, I should have hired this person 3 months ago. So if you're going through hyper growth, chances are you're going to need this either recruiter or HR lead. Start putting feelers out there. Start talking to people. It may take 3 to 4 months to find the person that you want, and you don't want to be playing catch up. You want to be ahead of the game in the ideal world. Cool. I think that. Oh.
What about like test taking? I think tests get brought up in a lot of processes, like data scientists and newer cloud engineers, right? I've seen processes extend out, drop off. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah,
So
you got that one.
yeah, I guess my first question back to you is, what tests have you seen that have been effective in kind of discovering if a candidate's a good fit?
Just for instance, like a Code Academy or a Linux Academy, and maybe for like entry-level folks, maybe just to kind of pull that, pull a little bit smaller before you get into it. You see the experts don't want to take a test. They might not take that opportunity because they don't want to take the test. So just kind of wanted to.
I've seen a lot of companies move away from do FizzBuzz or do like Skyline tests because it proves it from an academic level, but not on I've actually applied this in a product before. I think walking through more hypothetical situations of I want to try to build this product and let's have an open dialogue about how you design it and why did you choose that, and having that conversation not only shows that they know how to solve it with certain algorithms or certain proven methods, but it also demonstrates those soft skills we're talking about earlier, that they know how to talk to the engineer, they know how to ask for the right requirements from their coworkers, and they know how to turn that into the product they're finally looking for. So I'm personally pretty against it. There's also people who you'll go do these, you do these interview exams, and they'll say, here's a piece of paper and a pen, and write it out for me. And I'm used to using VI or something where I have autocomplete, or there's resources available online. And when you take that away from a candidate, it doesn't mean they're not capable. A good candidate isn't necessarily defined by someone who's memorized every single solution. It's someone who's resourceful, knows where to find the answers they need, and can build that product. And those tests or exams really eliminate a lot of those candidates right from the start. So that's my personal opinion. I'm sure other people have other views of it. And then with that, there was silence. Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.